Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today we're doing my final election prediction for the 2026 Georgia Governor Republican primary. You may have seen my video that came out on the Georgia U.S. Senate primary. I believe it came out yesterday. If you want to check that out after this video as well, I'd really appreciate it. This video is focusing on the Republican governor primary between Rick Jackson and Burt Jones and what is shaping up to be a very, very competitive race and one that's going to lead to a very competitive general election as well. So the outcome of this really plays a very important role. So without further ado, let's get into this video. Rick Jackson, Burt Jones, officially the primary runoff. Now, in the 2026 Georgia governor initial primary that took place, we saw that Burt Jones on May 19th, Burt Jones and Rick Jackson both ended up advancing to a runoff election. The way Georgia election law works is if no candidate in the primary breaks 50% of the vote, a runoff of the top two vote getters will go ahead. And Burt Jones and Rick Jackson easily finished in first and second place, with their next closest challenger being Brad Raffensperger, I believe it's Secretary of State of the state of Georgia, obviously, finished in third place at 15%, and then Attorney General Chris Carr in fourth place at 11.85%. So a clear gap between Burt Jones and Rick Jackson at the top of the ticket. However, those Raffensperger and Chris Carr voters are going to be very significant, as they add up to roughly close to 27% of the overall primary vote in this election. Burt Jones only getting 38.35 and Rick Jackson only getting 32.51. If either of these two candidates are going to win the runoff, getting a lot of those Raffensperger Carr voters is going to be very essential. There were also four other candidates in the race in Clark Dean, Greg Kirkpatrick, Ken Yasgur, and Thomas Williams. They combined add up to a little bit more than like 2% of the vote, so not a super drastic amount, but again, in a very close race like this one's expected to be, could play a very important role. So in overall, Burt Jones ended up having 358,000 votes, Rick Jackson ended up having 303, a gap of roughly about a 55,000 vote lead for Jones over Jackson in this initial vote dump. And you see here across the state, Burt Jones, who's the current lieutenant governor of the state, I'm going to tell you this now because it's very important, but I'm sure I'll come back up again, has the endorsement of President Trump in this race, and he had the endorsement of Trump heading into this primary as well. So this is well known that Jones has Trump's endorsement. Jones did very well in a lot of the same areas that Mike Collins in the Senate race did very well throughout the rest of the state. The smaller areas that are the more rural areas that Republicans do very well in the general elections, they all really raked up a lot of numbers for Burt Jones. Where Rick Jackson did very well, he did well in this portion of the state here, stretching from Talbot County down to about Calhoun County. This could be the part of the state where potentially he may be from. He did very well in this area of the state. Again, not a whole lot population-wise, but he did well in this area of the state. You see a few pockets here and there of close races that did ultimately go for Rick Jackson, including right here in the capital of Augusta, Georgia. Now, that's wrong. I did this last time. The capital obviously is Atlanta. I can't believe I made that mistake twice. I'm very, very ashamed. I thought I was going to get it right this time. Richmond County, where Augusta, Georgia is, and it voted for, I'm thinking of Maine. I'm thinking of Augusta, Maine. That's so embarrassing. Richmond County, where the city of Augusta is, did, however, vote for Rick Jackson, though, by a little bit over Burt Jones. So we got a few close wins there. Atlanta's interesting as well. Fulton County very narrowly voted for Rick Jackson over Burt Jones. But then Brad Raffensperger got 23.72% of the vote here in Fulton County. And DeKalb County went for Brad Raffensperger as well. And then these northern counties like Forsyth, Fulton, Cherokee, Dawson, Hall up here voted for Rick Jackson as well. So what are we looking out for here? Well, it's going to be interesting because Rick Jackson, there's two different types of candidates here. Obviously, the Trump-endorsed candidate in the race is Burt Jones. You could say the more moderate, quote-unquote, Republican candidate would be Rick Jackson. So for Brad Raffensperger, who, if you know the backstory of Raffensperger and President Trump in the 2020 election fallout, you would know Brad Raffensperger is not the most pro-Trump Republican in the state of Georgia. And a lot of Brad Raffensperger's 15% would likely see vote for Rick Jackson as like a vote against President Trump. So I would bet of the 15% of Raffensperger's voters, a good amount of them would probably go to Jackson. Now, he's not going to win all of them, but if he did, that would get him to roughly 47.51% of the vote. Chris Carr's 11.85% is also going to play a very important role. Chris Carr, the Attorney General, is someone I think who's Trump's voters who probably would like President Trump more than Brad Raffensperger's voters would, and that's going to be an important split as well. So roughly about 17% of the vote here supported these two candidates, and one candidate I would say for sure would be more considered anti-Trump. Chris Carr is someone you could argue pro-Trump or anti-Trump either way there. So in terms of where this ultimately goes here, you're shaping up for a race where I think Burt Jones and Rick Jackson are sort of starting at very similar places, where I think both are expected to probably get around 47% of the vote. And I'm going to show you some polling here that supports this. We can look at the Georgia governor election heading into the Republican primary. The polling in the last few days showed a very tight race. Jackson led by 3.3%, with Jackson at 27.8%, Burt Jones 24.5%, Raffensperger 14%, Chris Carr 6.9%, with about 27% undecided. Now heading into the runoff, there's only been a handful of polls, and we'll go on the decision desk side as well to make sure we're not missing any. So the Signal poll was the last one, so we do have that one on here. And it shows that Rick Jackson is at 56%, Burt Jones is at 44%. Signal Republican pollster, no sample size or margin of error information though. JMC Analytics, 4-point margin of error. Jackson's leading Burt Jones only by about 2 points, 45 to 43. Now in Signal's prior poll showed Rick Jackson at 50, Burt Jones at 50. So a tied race in that poll. Now apparently is now Jackson plus 12. Insider Advantage and Qantas Insights before that, though, showed Burt Jones leading roughly by about 6 points in Insider Advantage and 2 points from Qantas Insights. So you have two polls showing a close lead, but a lead for Burt Jones. You see one poll showing a blowout lead for Rick Jackson, one poll showing a close lead for Rick Jackson, and one poll showing a tied race. When polls like this are sort of all over the place, to me it says there's not one clear leader in this race, and it really can go either way. And that's definitely where it certainly seems right now. Now, Burt Jones having the endorsement of President Trump certainly gives him a very important leg up in this race. At the same time, Rick Jackson running as someone that is not necessarily anti-Trump, but has also not been, I would say, hasn't gone out of his way 100% to be like the pro-Trump candidate like Burt Jones has, does have its benefits, again, with those Brad Raffensperger voters and maybe some of the Chris Carr voters as well. So it's going to be interesting. I think we actually saw a good example of this in Iowa of Randy Feenstra versus Zach Land in the Republican governor primary, where it ended up being like a 1-point win or a 2-point win for Zach Land over Randy Feenstra. I would not be shocked if we're sort of coming to this in the Republican primary in the state of Georgia. The Signal poll, if that's correct, and Jackson's up by 12 points, obviously with hindsight we'll know for sure how it'll go, but sitting at it today, even though it is the most recent poll, I have a hard time believing that the Trump-endorsed candidate is down by 12 points right now. I think Burt Jones certainly could lose his primary. Again, it's like 50-50 chance on who's going to win it, but I think Jackson winning it by 12, I think I'd be pretty shocked to see that. JMC Analytics has it 2 points for Jackson, tied race from the prior Signal poll. An Insider Advantage has Jones up by 6. Qantas Insights has Jones up by 2. There's still a good amount of undecided vote in this race, and it's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out. It really is back and forth here. I wouldn't blame you for going for Jones or Jackson in this race. It's super, super, super close. So before we can move on to the general election, though, I do want to show you what the odds are currently saying in this race, because they're also very close. Currently, 54% chance for Burt Jones to win, 45% chance for Rick Jackson. And this is what's interesting here. We can look in the last month, where Rick Jackson, around, obviously the primary day, around May 19th, Burt Jones takes a massive lead. He goes up to 83.2%, and Jackson's down to 21%. This is on Kalshi. Look at how things have trended. We can look, say, around May 29th. Jones is at 65.4, Jackson 31.4. We can go to about June 8th. Only about, let's see, I'm recording this video on about early Sunday, so we're looking roughly about 6 days ago now. Jones is at 72, Jackson's at 30.6. Come to now, the race is narrowed even more, where it's 54 to 45. So what does that say? Yes, Burt Jones is still in the lead. He has a 54% chance to win. Jackson has a 45% chance to win. But the trend in the race has been no doubt that Jackson is the one making up ground in these odds, which shows a lot of uncertainty in this race, that maybe Jackson is actually gaining momentum in this. It's sort of similar to the Jasmine Crockett versus James Talrico race, where In the polling, Jasmine Crockett actually led, I believe, in the final polling in the Texas Senate race, but the market odds showed Talarico gaining and gaining in the final few days. Talarico ends up winning. So for Jones versus Jackson, it's a jump ball essentially on the odds side of things and on the polling side. The trend in the recent time zone the last month has been Jackson's been growing on this regard. In Polymarket, you're going to see something similar. 57% chance for Burt Jones and 42% chance for Rick Jackson to win. In the last month, very similar. June 9th, 68-30. June 10th, 58-41. 54-46 on June 13th, now 57-42. Having the endorsement of President Trump certainly gives a very important leg up for Burt Jones in this Republican primary. But Rick Jackson has the momentum right now, according to the odds. The most recent poll has him up by 12 points. So you could really argue either way between Burt Jones or Rick Jackson. We did just see a Trump-endorsed candidate lose in Iowa, so it is possible, but it's certainly not the norm. South Carolina could be another potential primary runoff where maybe the Trump-endorsed candidate wins or could potentially go down as well. It's really close. It's really down to the wire. Rick Jackson really came out of nowhere in this race and is just taking it by storm on the Republican side. And the odds shifting sort of last minute to get a lot closer is going to narrowly put me in the direction I think Rick Jackson wins, and I think he wins by under 5 points. I think we're looking somewhere around like a 51.5 to 48.5 type of election, like a 3-point margin of victory. I don't think we're going to see a very big win here. I think this race is going to take a while on election night to call because I think Jackson and Jones is going to be a very, very close race. I'm going to narrowly give the edge to Rick Jackson, but man, oh man, is this race going to be very, very close on primary night. So that's for the primary. Rick Jackson, currently my projected favorite. Let's talk about the general election now. I currently have 9 governor's races listed as toss-up, and I have toss-up as anything I view as 5% margin of victory or under, and Georgia falls in that category. Now, in looking at the general election here, we already know the Democratic candidate in Keisha Lance Bottoms, the former mayor of the city of Atlanta, the actual capital of Georgia, just to make that clear, just to prove I got that right this time. And this race is essentially as dead even as you can get. It's toss-up from pretty much all the prediction sites except for Inside Elections, who has it as tilt Republican. And Jon Ossoff, the U.S. Senator, is also up for re-election in this race, has done a post-primary endorsement of Bottoms. That's not a surprise, but he's really staking his re-election to trying to get Lance Bottoms elected as well. Now, some have been looking at this as the prospects of a Ossoff maybe 2028 presidential campaign or even vice presidential campaign, where if Ossoff becomes president or vice president, then his Senate seat would be vacant, and the governor of the state of Georgia would have to appoint a interim successor, and then a special election and all that stuff. Now, if the Democratic governor appoints another Democrat, the Democrats don't lose the Senate seat. If the Republican wins, like if Rick Jackson or Burt Jones wins, the Republican governor would appoint a Republican senator, flipping a Democratic seat from blue to red. So Jon Ossoff and his team here clearly are making a political calculus here to try and do everything they can to help get Keisha Lance Bottoms elected. Because as the incumbent U.S. Senator, Jon Ossoff has raised a ton of money. He's raised over $82 million in this race. So not only is he ready, it seems, for a Senate run, he may be gearing up to try and help Lance Bottoms win the governor's race as well. Lance Bottoms is running an open race against either Jackson or Jones. It's an open race, obviously no incumbent, so you would argue without an incumbent in the race, it may be easier even for this race to flip. Now, Georgia, if you've been following elections recently and politics recently, you know about Georgia. You know how competitive it is. Let's just get the polling out of the way now because there's only been one poll for the general election from Echelon Insights showing Bottoms up about 6 points, but still 8% undecided in both of these matchups. So from a polling standpoint, technically we basically have nothing. But from that April poll, Lance Bottoms does have a lead, though still under that 50% margin that you have to hit in Georgia to be elected governor. Though you would assume Lance Bottoms would start out based on that poll as an early favorite to win this race if the poll is ultimately correct. Now, Georgia, we know how close it is. It voted for Trump by 2.2% in 2024, voted for Biden by 0.24% in 2020, it voted for Trump by 5.1% in 2016. When you were compared by margin, here we can actually go into the state of Georgia here, and we go to the 2024 map, and we'll compare it to past elections here. From 2020 to 2024, obviously a lot of Georgia swung back towards the Republicans. A few areas didn't, like Henry County and Rockdale County. But this is where things really talk about. From 2016 to 2024, A lot of metro Atlanta and Fulton County and surrounding counties around Atlanta have gone heavily to the Democrats. Cobb County has moved about 12.7%, Cherokee 10.5%, Forsyth 14.1%, Hall's moved 6.5%, Gwinnett's moved 10.7%, DeKalb's moved 1.2%, Henry 25.3%, Rockdale 21.7%, Fayette 16.2%. Going back to the Mitt Romney era as well, even farther, a 27-point gain from the Democrats for the Republicans to the Democrats in Cobb County, 15 points in Fulton County, DeKalb 8%, Gwinnett 25%. So the era of Republicans, we can even look at this map from 2012, where Mitt Romney won the state of Georgia by 7.8% at the presidential election. That era certainly seems to be gone in the state of Georgia. Now, Trump did win it in 2016 by 5.1%, but Trump, even in 2024, doing his absolute, probably best electorally, won it by 2.2%. That era of Georgia being a likely Republican state at the presidential level seems to be over. Now, I will say, though, for Brian Kemp, he got reelected in 2022 against Stacey Abrams, a rematch of the 2018 race, and Kemp won by 7.5%. So Kemp shows that a popular Republican incumbent who will be supportive of President Trump, but certainly not 100% MAGA diehard Republican like Brian Kemp, is capable of winning re-election by a solid amount in the state of Georgia, at least at the governor level. Kemp won by 7.5%. Now, across the map here, in the governor's race, 49.3% of the total vote went to the Democrats. Republicans were 49.1%. So the Democrats overall had a net win of roughly 0.2% of the vote. I'm saying this because it's an important metric to keep an eye on. Trump's approval rating is currently down about 14.7%. In terms of the generic ballot for Congress, it's amounting to a Democratic lead of 4.4% of the vote. So when you're trying to predict what kind of midterm election environment it's going to be in 2026, there's always different factors, but typically the party not in power does well, meaning the president's party in control of the Senate and the House, if they have it, typically don't do too well in the midterms. This would give the Democrats the added bonus here. So we've seen Kemp, as the incumbent, win re-election by 7.5%, but we also saw in 2018 first-time candidate Kemp only win by 1.4% against Stacey Abrams in 2018, which, stop me if you heard this before, was a midterm in President Trump's first term, where President Trump wasn't polling too strong, and the Democrats were on paper to have a very good night. Now, the Democrats came very close to winning the state of Georgia and the governor's side at 1.4%. Democrats got 51.4% of the vote nationwide, Republicans 48.3%. This would amount to roughly about a 3.1% win for the Democrats across the country. And again, the right track, or the generic ballot right now, is 4.4%. So based on the 2018 numbers, if you want to look at it that way, and again, there were some interesting numbers here because there was a Republican governor in Massachusetts. There was obviously Democratic governor in Kansas. So the numbers may be off a little bit. So it's not going to be 100% accurate if we were to look back on this in November. But about a 3.1% win. What if we were to shift this, and I believe we can by edit by margin here, let's shift it another point, bring it up to what I say it was about, I want to say it was 4.1%, so about 0.3% shy of the current margin here. Well, Georgia would be at 0.4%. So another shift of about 0.3 to 0.4% of the vote would have Georgia essentially a 50-50 tie in this race based on the 2018 results out of the Georgia governor's race when Kemp was not the incumbent and it was an open race. If you were to do this on the same map, it would end up having, from 2022, it would be like a Republican win of like 2 to 3 points, which is possible, but both Burt Jones and Rick Jackson are first-time Republican candidates. They are not the incumbent governor. Now, when I mean first time, obviously Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones has the office of Lieutenant Governor, but this is his first time running as the Republican nominee for governor. Same thing with Rick Jackson, facing off against Keisha Lance Bottoms, who's facing the same situation. It's not like an incumbent governor is running for re-election in this state. So the 2018 comparison, I think, is more likely than the 2022 one. And based on that shift, I don't know if we can do it another shift here. I don't know if we can. I mean, we can try it. We can see if we can make it work here. If we get another 0.5%, I'm not totally sure if you're allowed to, but let's shift the race. Let me just do this first. Let me just make sure I get the number totally right before I mess anything up here. 51.4, 48.3, you're looking again at like a 3.1% win there. So you want to go up another 1.3% on the shift. So we'll shift the map, we'll go by 1 point, and we'll add 0.3%. So an exact shift to the current generic ballot on the governor map, Georgia would go for the Republican, based on the Brian Kemp results, by 0.089%. Now, that is also taking account, or not taking account, excuse me, the population growth in the state of Atlanta from 2018 to now. It's not taking account Joe Biden winning the state in 2020, Donald Trump winning the state in 2022, only by 2.2%, after he won it in 2016 by 5%. So you could argue, well then, wouldn't the growth in the Atlanta areas and the surrounding counties in like DeKalb County and Gwinnett County and such throughout the state of Georgia, wouldn't that mean hypothetically that Georgia is more favored to flip than the 2018 Senate map would suggest? And I would say you have a very good chance of being correct in assuming that. So what this means for the Georgia governor's race in 2026 is, first things first, the Democrat candidate. Is Keisha Lance Bottoms a strong enough candidate, as Stacey Abrams was, where she came within about 2 points of winning this race in a Trump midterm? Can Keisha Lance Bottoms do that? I would say pretty confidently, given the midterm environment, she probably can. The question is, can she exceed on those margins against Rick Jackson or Burt Jones in the race? That's going to be the ultimate question. Georgia is one of the toughest governor's races, I know for me personally, in 2026 to try and predict, because the election environment to me suggests this should be a Democratic win. Just showing you the shift here of the current generic ballot ratings suggests this should be a Democratic win. I've seen something online, some talks online about Keisha Lance Bottoms not being the super strongest Democratic candidate, like she maybe won't have the same turnout numbers that Stacey Abrams did. But being the former mayor of Atlanta, you would think that would help her in Fulton County and the surrounding areas as well. So the Georgia governor's race, it's going to be really interesting because you're going to have the Atlanta area, I'm sure, trending very large to the Democratic side. Can Rick Jackson or Burt Jones do well enough in the rural areas like the Republicans typically do, but also in the suburban areas to keep the race from ultimately flipping is going to be really what ultimately will end up determining this race. So Georgia, for the general, I have it as a toss-up. I'm certainly leaving it in the toss-up category, no doubt. But this is a race that, to me, is 100%. If there's a third-party candidate going to a runoff, if it's only the two candidates between the Democrat and the Republican, I think it stays under 2% margin of victory for sure once everything is said and done. And whether it's the Democrat or the Republican, really take your pick. I think my last prediction, I think I had it going for the Democrat by like under 1 point. And I think, honestly, very well could be the same case on the Republican side, under 1 point in Georgia. It's super, super close. You could really go back and forth on this one between what you think is going to happen in the Georgia governor's race. I really think it's going to end up being the closest race in the United States when everything is said and done. But I hope you enjoyed this video. Again, primaries on Tuesday, so make sure to get out and vote if you live in the state of Georgia. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, as I post at least one new video every day that you're not going to want to miss, especially heading into the summertime as we start talking about the midterms more, and the 2028 presidential election will start to pick up as well. So please, I encourage you to check out my channel and the videos I post every day, and hitting like and subscribe would really help me and my channel out a long way. For now, that'll be it. Thank you so much for watching. Hope to see you in a future video.